Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. My name is Leah Swanberg, and I'm the founder of Canadian Fertility Consultants and Egg Helpers. I am joined today by Ellen Embry of Embry West, an amazing law firm in Alberta who works with clients across Canada and around the globe as they begin their families through egg donation and surrogacy. I am also joined by Dr. Taylor, an amazing fertility doctor in Vancouver, who shows up in just such a beautiful way for surrogates. And I have heard so many amazing things about the way in which she delivers patient care and have witnessed it firsthand with surrogates. And so I'm so glad to have you here as well, Dr. Taylor. So thank you for joining us. So we are going to start by welcoming everyone. If you see to the right, you'll see a comments area in which Aaliyah has posted, welcome to our webinar. That will be a place that you can drop questions that you have for myself, Dr. Taylor, or Ellen, and we will answer them either on our slide, or if you'd like, you can hold your questions to the end. Our goal is that we get all of your questions answered throughout this webinar. Also, if you have to hop off, if you're at work or it's late where you live, please know a recording will be coming to you as well once it is ready to be sent out, along with contact details and information for myself, Ellen, and Dr. Taylor. So we are first going to start with Dr. Taylor. Welcome. I know that you have some slides and I know I have some questions. So here we are. Aaliyah is going to get started there. Perfect. Great. So Dr. Taylor, if you'd like to go through these slides, and then I have some questions that people have sent us through Instagram that I will ask you at the end.
For sure. Well, look, thanks a lot for having me contribute to this webinar. I think this is really important way to access a lot of people in a way that I think is efficient. And to that point, I really want to make sure this is useful for people. So if there's questions, and Leah will guide that too, but please just put them into the chat and I'll be happy to answer them. So you're getting your questions answered. Next slide. So I'm going to talk about egg donation and surrogacy. Maybe next slide. And then I'll start with egg donation. Now, just a little bit of boring background. 2020 Health Canada said there should be two types of egg donors in Canada. Regular process, which is what you'd call an anonymous egg donor, which would be eggs come from a bank, or directed donors. Those are people that typically or have some sort of connection to through an agency or whatnot, but some sort of a connection to them. And they're treated a little bit differently. But mostly what I'll be talking about today is the directed donor. So this is someone who maybe you met through an agency, maybe it's a sibling that you're going to bring to a clinic to have them screened as donors and get their eggs and use them to make embryos. I'll make one sidebar as well. I'll give the example of a straight couple, both are cisgendered. So if you got a husband and wife, say for example, and they need to use a surrogate, they're both considered donors. I know this is funny language from Health Canada, but they're both considered donors, and that woman would be also considered a directed donor. So she would go through the same process. So just not to make things unnecessarily confusing, but anyone who's using their eggs for surrogacy or anyone who's donating their eggs, I'll just kind of walk through that process. But my focus will really be on people who are donating eggs for someone else's use. Okay, so next slide. Sorry, I feel like I made that a little unnecessarily confusing, but I'll clarify it as we go along. So if you're looking for an egg donor, and you might be, again, through an agency looking at a coworker at work who's 28 and you think, hey, I like their genetics. If you see someone that might be an egg donor, ideally they're under age 35 because egg health declines with age. So healthier eggs are younger eggs. Biology always trumps everything else. So young eggs are better. So you want them under age 35 ideally. Look, we've done 38-year-old egg donors who are sisters or friends of people for sure, but this is who makes an ideal egg donor. Ideally, they've got a nice high egg count. An egg count can be measured in a few different ways, but the most efficient way to do it is to just get a blood test called an AMH. Some provinces, that's publicly funded blood test. In some provinces like mine in British Columbia, you pay about $70 or $80 for that blood test. Really powerful test because it does tell us about egg number. So you want young eggs that are plentiful. The person should be medically well, well enough to go through the process of having their ovaries grow multiple eggs and having the eggs extracted. So they should be medically well, which most people under 35 are. And ideally, though not, I don't have to, but ideally they would have, a BMI that's less than 40. But at our center, you can go up to a BMI of 50, but it's really, it's harder to get the eggs, and you tend to get fewer eggs because the medicines don't work as well. So ideally, someone with a little bit of a lower BMI. So that would be who would make an ideal egg donor. Next slide. Once you've identified that egg donor, as I said at the outset, they now have to be screened. So we have to follow the Health Canada rules for screening them as a donor. So they have to have a chat with them and get their medical records. We do blood and urine testing to make sure they don't have an infection that could be transmitted to you or a surrogate. And we do an ultrasound to look at the ovaries and make sure where the eggs are looking healthy and there's no cysts. Then they have psychological counseling, so they know kind of just a chance to discuss the significance of what they're doing. A legal contract is then completed, and then they essentially do an IVF cycle where they take injections morning and night for about 10 days. That should cause their ovaries to grow multiple eggs, and I say multiple, somewhere between 10 and 30. A nice donation is, in my mind, is between 20 and 30 eggs. Something in that range is what we kind of aim for. If they can give us that, then those eggs are, once they're out of her body, they're considered donated, and then typically they're fertilized with sperm to make embryos, and then the embryos are developed for a few days in the lab, typically about 6 days. Then they're frozen, waiting for a uterus to go into, and sometimes that uterus is you have a uterus. You're an intended parent, and you just need an egg donor, and you're the uterus. But other times it's going into a surrogate. So that's sort of the layout of who makes an ideal egg donor and what the egg donor goes through to get to the point where we're making embryos with their eggs. Next slide. Now, this is just to get a sense of what a clinic is doing. Like we're we are the largest in BC. There's clinics all across the country doing this work. I divided it up, but these are the number we've screened in the last 18 months. So this is the number of directed egg donors. So egg donors that we've known and have come into the clinic and we've extracted their eggs. We're up around 150 or 160 in the last 18 months. And you can see some of them, they're donating for themselves, which is the non-surrogacy scenario, or sometimes, sorry, not for themselves, but for the intended parent. They're donating to them for their own pregnancy. And others, they're donating to make embryos that go into a surrogate, and pretty similar numbers in both cases. Next slide. I'm going to pivot now to surrogacy because I don't want to take up all the time on the webinar, and I want a chance for questions and for Leah to let me know what would be most useful to talk about. But I'll also talk about surrogacy. So you've got embryos now, and you need a uterus. You need someone to incubate and carry your baby for you. And the ideal person, again, you don't have to be ideal, but ideally they're under 40, they've had a baby, their uterus is normal, they're well, and their BMI is less than 40. We have surrogates, however, who are in their mid-40s. We have surrogates who have a BMI of 43. We have surrogates who've never had a baby before. So you don't have to be perfect, but we should do our best to get you close to that. So sometimes when their BMI is over 40, we'll have them take some medications like Ozempic to bring that weight down, just to try to make the pregnancy as healthy as possible. If they haven't had a baby before, I spend a little extra time counseling what the risks of pregnancy are for them. If they're not medically perfect, maybe there's some, we'll adjust their medications or work. Like one of the surrogates right now we're screening, she has a history of having a stroke, which sounds really terrible, but the truth is she had a stroke because of a motor vehicle accident. Well, that's not going to happen again, presumably. So we can do some things to still use that surrogate, even though they may have an imperfect medical history. So you don't have to be perfect, but this would be who is ideal. And I think that's almost more common sense than it is medical wisdom to tell you who makes an ideal surrogate, right? Next slide. So once you've identified the surrogate, or Leah's done it for you, which is great, I'll consult with them and I'll get their medical records. And if they've been a surrogate before, we'll try to replicate what worked if it was successful. So get their records, review their medical history, get some blood and urine tested to make sure there's no chance of infection and that their hormones are well balanced. Check the uterus out, the ultrasound, sono, hysteroscopy, some sort of test of the uterus or some combination thereof. They'll also have some counseling and a legal contract. And then we'll thaw one or sometimes two, but typically one embryo of yours, and we'll put it into the surrogate's uterus. That process takes some time. Once the surrogate's identified, these steps that as you see them on the screen might take, say, 3 or 4 months, depending on clinic, their availability, how easy it is for them to get these tests in their home community and things. So I was usually estimate about 4 months. So sometimes it's faster if they live down the street from the clinic and Leah's reached out. We can make it go a little faster, but other times it could be 4 months or longer. Next slide. Just to get a sense of the service that we do at our center. I know there are bigger programs in the country, but this is our numbers, and it's rising every year by about 10 to 20%. So, and we know, as everyone on this webinar knows, that if we could get more surrogates, we could probably do about 3 or 4 times this volume, but we're limited by availability of the surrogate. Next slide. Just to give a sense of pregnancy rate, I talked initially about, whether you're doing it with your eggs or you're using it with an egg donor, getting embryos that are frozen. And then typically we're putting in one at a time. And the chances that you have a positive pregnancy test is in the range of 70 to 80% positive pregnancy test. But as everyone knows, you can miscarry or something can go sideways in the pregnancy. So you end up with about a 65% live. I always quote 65% live birth rate for people per embryo. And I only have that number up just as a reminder that you need a lot of embryos, because certainly to have one child, you need a couple of embryos for sure to give you a good shot. And ideally even more if you want more than one child, because every embryo doesn't make a baby, sadly. So that slide is just to remind me to emphasize that point. Next slide. This is my last slide, actually. And I just wanted to make a couple of random statements that might be helpful for people. I've always felt that Canada is the best place in the world to do surrogacy for lots and lots of reasons. We have excellent healthcare. It doesn't always feel that way, but we have very good healthcare that's covered by everyone gets healthcare, including surrogates and babies. And so it's a great place that way. We have as Ellen will get into, we have, I think, quite progressive federal and provincial laws around parentage that I think help intended parents. But the downside of surrogacy in Canada is it's a bit slow, right? There's not a lot of surrogates for various reasons. But there's a balance. And when I speak to the slow part, just to get a sense of it, is 3 months from a physician consult for an egg donor into IVF, and about 4 months, as I said, from a surrogate into an embryo transfer. So that's the slow side in Canada. But I think it's quality care. I think we have good, maybe some of the best in the world pregnancy rates. So I'm very proud of surrogacy in Canada. I think there needs to be some changes, but if you can persist and get some good support from agencies like Leah's, I think it's a very positive experience in the end. So, and I like to be part of that. So thanks for letting me contribute a few thoughts, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Excellent. So the first question came through Instagram, and it is a question actually from one of your patients who says, I believe I've identified a surrogate who lives in Nova Scotia. Is it possible for us to bring her to British Columbia for treatment at your clinic? And does she need to see you throughout the pregnancy?
Really good question. We get this all the time. Should the surrogate move to the embryo, or should the embryo move to the surrogate? I think that's part of your question is in there. And I really like this, and this might be an arm wrestle between Leah and I, but I really like the surrogate to come to us. I think
Agreed.
The people that freeze your embryo should thaw, and we actually, our own internal pregnancy rates are better if we're thawing our own embryos versus someone else's, even though we thaw their protocol, even though we have the same pipettes and same slides and same media. It's better for the clinic to thaw embryos that they've frozen. So I would move your surrogate here for the transfer. Then she would return home to Nova Scotia and have her pregnancy care. So typically that sort of geographically remote surrogacy, I'm not actually, as much as I'd like to be, is involved beyond getting them pregnant. And then they would have their pregnancy test and their pregnancy care in their home community, just for logistically, because so often surrogates have young kids and they need to be at home. So we try to minimize their travel, but they should come to the clinic where the embryos are, in my mind.
I absolutely agree.
Yeah.
Myself, I believe in being able to just have a lot of transparency around the freezing and thawing of the embryos. And so whenever that's an opportunity, I think it's fantastic. You created these embryos. And so if it doesn't work at another center, we've often had times where, the new center says, well, it was the way they were frozen. And so I really love having it all in one place. And in my mind, and just over the last 20 years, I have seen the investment that physicians have in their patients and really just wanting to go that extra mile for them. And I think a stranger, like a doctor that's a stranger, will do a great job, but I absolutely agree on that as well.
And we speak the exact Nova Scotia example, if I can for a second. We actually moved embryos out because the surrogate didn't want to come out across the country. So we moved embryos out this summer for a couple of hours. The Halifax Good Clinic did the thaw, but the first embryo didn't survive the thaw. Second one did. Surrogate's pregnant. There is a happy ending, but it's really unusual for an embryo not to survive the thaw. And of course, they blame us and we blame them. But that was my point. I'm like, yes, I hate moving embryos around. But anyway, happy ending. But to go through two normal embryos is a bit unusual. So anyway, but we just blamed each other, and you can imagine. But anyway.
Yep, absolutely. The next question is from intended parents that are asking, in terms of this is kind of complicated and I don't have the whole story, but is there a way to genetically test embryos at your clinic? The intended mom has a very specific gene mutation and they can't use, or they haven't been able to use her eggs unless they do this testing.
Got it. Yeah. So when you make embryos, they're a whole collection of cells, maybe say 300 cells at the time that we're kind of going to use them. We almost always recommend you test that embryo to see if it's got a chromosome issue like Down syndrome or Turner syndrome or those kind of big chromosome issues. But if you have a known genetic issue, you can also test those embryos for that. It is best to test them as they're made when they're still fresh before they've ever been frozen. Okay. We don't love thawing embryos and then testing them because it's you'd be thawing and freezing and thawing, and so it's a bit harsh can be harsh on an embryo. So we prefer to, if you're going to test for a genetic condition, you should do it when the embryo is first made. If you haven't done it and you found out later you have a genetic condition, then you can thaw them and test them. But there actually was a big publication in our big fertility and sterility in the summer showing it does drop your pregnancy rates, that freeze, thaw, freeze, that it is a bit harmful. So you probably need a little more of that story to really give you guidance. But yes, you can test an embryo for a genetic condition.
Excellent. Thank you. And I'll move over to our questions. First one is, what if the surrogate is in a different country? How does the process differ than the example from Nova Scotia?
So this is the lawyer popping up. Yeah. If the idea is, can I fly the surrogate from another country to Dr. Taylor's clinic, that would be a Dr. Taylor question for sure. If the question, and let's assume that this question is about flying a surrogate from another country to your clinic, Dr. Taylor, what would your answer be there?
For sure. Yeah, it's the same whether you live anywhere, whether you, we just follow this, we follow the exact same thing, whether your surrogate's flying in from Mexico or the Czech Republic or wherever they're coming in from. Legally, it's much more complicated, and keeping in compliance with the federal law is more complicated. Medically, it's identical, whether they're flying in from Portugal or whether they're flying in from Alberta, it's the same for us.
And I would say that there are many people, in my experience, who have had a sister, cousin, friend outside of Canada participate as their surrogate. And so it's, about finding, outside monitoring for the surrogate, where they live, for ultrasounds and blood work and all of that. Is an important piece, but having someone that carry for you often supersedes any sort of details that we've seen needing to be organized, for sure. Okay, the next question, I'm going to leave that, Ellen, for your piece. Martin, how do you source a surrogate? Can we source through Olive? So I'll answer that. Martin, go on social media. I'm telling you, surrogates are there. If you're public and open about your journey, I would absolutely suggest beginning to share, very vulnerably about your search and your desire for fatherhood. And if you have a partner, your desire for parenthood, in whatever makeup that is. If you have a male partner, female partner, really begin sharing. Not everybody needs an agency, although we would love to have a consult with you and share what we do. For many, many people, they are able to locate surrogates in their own lives. And again, there's just no better way than, in my view, than to experience this with someone that you already care about. And Dr. Taylor, I guess that question is for you as well.
No, completely agree. Olive doesn't have a bank of surrogates, so no, you wouldn't source through us. You'd source through Leah. Yeah.
Okay. That's the last question I have is, with an egg donor that we source through an agency, we just bring her to your clinic. Sorry, it's kind of a long question, but basically the question is, if we have someone that we meet online and we bring them to the clinic, is that something that's allowed?
For sure. That's how typically it happens, actually, is they find someone online, you find someone in your family or social groups, or you meet them through an agency, and then you bring them to us, and we go through those steps that I mentioned. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I'm sure there's going to be more questions, so we'll just keep the chat open if any other questions come up for you. Yes, Ellen will talk about citizenship arrangements, so we'll move to Ellen for those. Thank you, Aaliyah. She already put that in there. So our role as an agency in Canada for surrogacy and egg donation, I'll start with egg donation. We have an amazing egg donor program. Many of our donors, I would say about 80% of them, have identified themselves as being willing to be known to the intended parent, so known at time of matching. And you would go onto our website, you would go through our database of donors, you would select one. You would contact us and say, I'd like this donor. We then move forward with some paperwork. We would introduce you if it was going to be a known donation. We would introduce you to Ellen to create the legal agreement for yourselves and the donor, which for us is just such an important piece of the process, that all intended parents and all egg donors have legal representation. We have matched and supported thousands of egg donors, and it is just such a pleasure for us. I myself have been an egg donor, mind you, over 20 years ago. My 3 adult kids have been egg donors, and we just truly believe so deeply in, showing up in community this way, and have been able to extend that into creating egg helpers. And so as you're looking at donors, finding the right donor is the donor that's right for you. Whether you are looking for someone who looks similar to you, whether you are looking for someone that has a similar education or background to you. And then I think what's the most important piece, and often is missed when intended parents are beginning this process, talk to a lot of intended parents who are looking for a tall, violin playing, LSAT scoring donor. And while I believe that there are things that are very important, if you're athletic and you want to share that, or you play the violin, or, all of those things can be important. I think really heavily leaning on your fertility doctor to look at the testing that's been completed. So all donors on our database have had their AMH, so that initial blood work. They've had an AFC, so natural follicle count, to look at the potential of eggs. Many of them have donated previously. Anyone that has donated previously has done the genetic counseling and genetic testing through Natera. And so while it would be great if she's really tall, she could be really tall and be a genetic mismatch for you. And so really working with your clinic around what their criteria are, what their screening is, what really matters in terms of ensuring that you're moving forward with a donor who is not only a physical match, but is a genetic match for you. Throughout the process, I always say the most important support is that goes to your egg donor. And so we have a great team. Christina heads the team, who's one of my kids, and in supporting the donors to ensure that they understand what's next, what's necessary, what's needed. And so a fertile young woman, often, a donor will often tell us, it's at the clinic and they were talking about all these things, and I didn't know what any of it meant. And so we really resource our donors to ensure that they know the questions to ask, that they have a basic understanding when they go to the clinic, and that they really are committed to this process and success for you as intended parents. And so as we're going through that process, we're working really closely with your clinic to ensure that any donor we send to them, that they have a complete profile, that they have all the information, they have the genetic testing, and that we know what your doctor needs us to know to share with your donor for it to be as successful as possible. In terms of our process at Helpers, all intended parents and all donors have legal representation. And I'll let Ellen talk a little bit about why that matters here shortly. And the same for surrogacy. We have just a really vibrant community of amazing people who have or are going through this experience of surrogacy. And our goal always is that intended parents have appropriate coaching around how to recruit a surrogate, how to create conversation, how to create a close relationship, because this is going to be the most intimate experience you have with an absolute stranger. And so how do we create connection? How do we lean into community, whether it's as an intended parent, through online platforms that we have, whether it's for your surrogate, ensuring that she is comfortable and safe. One of the most dangerous places a woman in North America can be is a delivery room. And so at CFC, my goal always, and my team's goal, is how do we keep women safe? And there's this theoretical risk that she's going to keep your kid. We all have our own kids. Even the surrogates that haven't had children yet, we are not interested. The real risk is prenatal depression, postpartum depression. And as I say it catches me because we take that so seriously, because we know the effects of alcohol and drugs on a pregnancy. What I think is yet to be determined is the effects of depression and anxiety disorders and isolation. And so really ensuring that your surrogate has support. At CFC, we have, for egg donors and for surrogates, we have a counselor on staff. It is free of charge, included in intended parent agency fees. The most important piece, egg donors as well, young women on large amounts of fertility medication, participating in this life-changing event for someone else. And what if, she thought there'd be 30 eggs and there was 10 and she feels she's let someone down? What if the clinic says she's not a suitable candidate? Whether someone's entering or exiting the program, it is so important that it's always done with care and concern for these amazing people and for you as intended parents. that is there as well, that counseling piece, free of charge. We offer coaching every second week to ensure that you have the skills and tools to navigate this experience that likely no one in your life has navigated. There are lots of books on lots of topics. And as Ellen, as Dr. Taylor, as myself could tell you, every single journey is so unique and different that, writing your own book on how you are going to move through this process. And I always say it's the agreement you make with yourself as you begin this journey, the agreement you make with your partner, if you have one, or with your family, whoever is going to be your support there, and then the agreement with the surrogate. And so making sure prior to making that agreement with the surrogate that you know what your values are on termination should there be a medical abnormality that arises, multiples and selective reduction, type of contact during, after, how to handle tough conversations. And if you're with an agency, they're going to have your forms and her forms, and they're only going to match up against the forms if they match. And so if you're doing this on your own, really looking at, and the invitation is to really get clear on what you're looking for, because 9 times out of 10, I'm looking for someone really great. I just like a friendship. My advice is you're here to have a child. And if a friendship develops, that's amazing. But how are you going to have boundaries to support your own health, mental health, as you move through this process? And we support the surrogates equally and differently. We have 2 teams, one for surrogates and one for intended parents. And I have reached my time. So I'm going to see if there's any questions and then turn it over to Ellen. Jason, we're currently looking at an egg donor that is completing a donation for another couple now. Jason, that really depends on the donor and how she's feeling post-retrieval and when she's ready to engage with your clinic, if it's different. And the clinician will guide that for the donor in terms of when it's safe to proceed. But, it will really sort of come down to, while I love when donors decide ahead of time, I also believe that until a donation is complete, it is difficult to, I don't want to say nail down a donor, it's the wrong word, but to know if the donor will really be able to participate, because there are many factors that come into play as the donation is happening. And so, Dr. Taylor, do you have sort of a timeline in between donation 1 or 2 or 3 or 4?
Yeah, typically we know from non-donor IVF cycles you can do back-to-back with no decrease in outcome. Okay. So you can do back-to-back. But, the logistics of this is that it'd be unlikely that a donor could actually donate within about a month or 2 of the donation, right? She may get hyperstimulation syndrome. She needs some screening and things done if assuming she's changing clinics. If she's not changing clinics, then yeah, you'd still probably, with the priming that happens, you probably have a 3-month interval from one egg retrieval to another. Even if you didn't want a delay, you probably, and 3 months is just fine, because the egg life cycle's 3 months. So if you're, it's kind of, in my mind, it's kind of nice to wait 3 months between egg retrievals, because you're getting a fresh batch of eggs essentially. So yeah, probably wouldn't be a big issue. Just because logistics will slow you down, maybe more than you want.
Absolutely. What is the current wait time to match? It's such a tough question. I will say we have 90% of our clients currently are same-sex male couples. And so we have this unique opportunity where we just have not a lot of heterosexual cisgender couples. And so, it really just depends on what your criteria are for a surrogate, and those pieces I talked about around termination, around type of contact, where you live. There's a lot at play, but we can definitely get on a call and sort of go over that. That would be my pleasure. Trudy, I saw that you asked about costs, and I would love to have more context about that. Okay, so we will absolutely send you sort of a breakdown of all costs, because it just, you know, just so people know, and maybe we'll send out a budget versus reality. We have another webinar that's really quite good. It's a bit scary because the number can creep quite high, but you know, there are sort of buckets. There's sort of the clinical process, the legal process, insurance for your baby if you as intended parents are outside of Canada and your baby won't meet the residency requirement. You know, that alone can be, you know, in the $20,000-$30,000 range. There's reimbursements to your surrogate. There's potentially an egg donor. In terms of showing evidence that funds are available, we've never really asked for that. The approach we've taken is really just to, you know, share our knowledge around potential costs with intended parents so that they have the opportunity to save for, ask family for, take a mortgage for, you know, as they're moving forward with this process. Okay. Oh, Trudy, wow. Okay, excellent. 2 embryos. We have lots of clients that enter our program with 2 embryos and are successful. And, you know, I always say to intended parents, you know, if you needed 5, could you get 3 more? And you may not. So absolutely, 2 embryos is a great start. And yeah, we'd love to connect with you. Okay, I think I've answered all the ones that go for me. I'm now going to introduce Ellen. Ellen, if you would like to just maybe introduce yourself a little bit, talk about, these questions, that'd be great.
Thank you so much, CFC, for inviting me to participate. It's always fantastic, people who are looking into the process. By way of background, my name is Ellen Embry, and my law partner's name is Rachel West. And together we have one of Canada's largest fertility and surrogacy law practices. We both do this most of the time. We also have an employment law practice, which helps us a lot in managing financial questions during the surrogacy process. And I do want to say that in the event that we run out of time today, we offer free consults. So we don't charge you. We are absolutely happy to have a half-hour call with you to answer questions around surrogacy, and those can be booked directly on our website. I'm a big fan of, you know, top 5, top 7 lists. And so what I thought that I would do is just address the main questions that I get as a surrogacy lawyer when I deal with clients coming, and a number of the questions that I've seen in the chat actually are those questions, and I'll answer as many as I can in the time that we have. So starting with the egg donation process, I often get asked, do I have to use an agency for an egg donor? Can I bring my own donor? Of course you can. There are, you know, agencies are there because we don't all have a sister or family member or friend to be a donor or a surrogate. You can absolutely bring your own donor to the process, and then if you need a surrogate, work with an agency. If your donor, however, that you're bringing to the process is your 42-year-old sister, I'm going to recommend that you talk to Dr. Taylor about whether or not that's going to be an appropriate donor for you. And we saw some of those criteria earlier. With donation agreements, you do have to have a legal donation agreement. Clinics won't work without them. We try to be really reasonable in donation agreements, and I'm not going to go through everything that we deal with, but high level, of course, there's a reassurance that the donor's, you know, not going to want to, you know, take your child. That one's obvious. Sometimes culturally, our clients really prefer anonymity, and we'll talk through that and work through how we deal with issues about the donor having other children or you having other children. We call that consanguinity. We want to make sure bluntly that those kids don't grow up and have sex with each other. It's a fairly remote possibility, but we want to talk about it and make sure that you understand going into it whether or not you want a relationship with your donor, whether your donor wants a relationship with you, or you would prefer to have a complete non-relationship, all of which is legally possible. Question 2, is surrogacy legal in Canada? Yes, surrogacy is absolutely legal in Canada. You are not allowed to compensate your surrogate, meaning you're not allowed to hand her $20,000 or $40,000 in exchange for being your surrogate. She's going to be entitled to reimbursable expenses. But I always want to make sure that clients know that the fact that we have an altruistic regime where surrogates get reimbursable expenses, I always say altruism does not mean austerity. Your surrogate is not required to have the cheapest of everything to try to save you money. And so we'll go through in quite a lot of detail when we talk about your surrogacy agreement, what those reimbursements look like. I'm often asked if we can use the same lawyer for all parties. Usually that's a financial saving advice. And I know that that is a more common process, particularly in some countries in Europe. My view is that with an ethical process, that's not appropriate. In the surrogacy contract stage, we need to know that the surrogate is doing this freely and voluntarily. And if the same lawyer is talking to both sides, that creates an inherent conflict of interest, particularly if that lawyer is being paid by the intended parents. So at the contract stage, no, the parties do need to have separate lawyers. At the birth stage, on the other hand, and I've got a few questions to answer about that, normally it is appropriate because that is if it's in one of the provinces that requires a court application, it's normal for the lawyer to act for all of the parties on consent, because we don't see surrogates attempting to keep children in Canada. I'm constantly asked, what will the birth certificate say? The birth certificate can say, and I want to be very clear, I am talking about every province other than Quebec. There is a list on my website that answers these questions. What will the birth certificate look like? How long will I be in Canada after the birth? What does the process look like? The website is canadafertility.law. But at a high level, if you are a same-sex couple living in France and you both want your names on the birth certificate, no problem. If you are a same-sex couple living in China, where it is not legally acceptable for two men to be on a birth certificate, I will ask you, what is your preference? Do you want to just put biological father on the birth certificate? Do you wish for the surrogate to stay on the birth certificate? With her consent, we can do that. And it's not unusual for me when I'm doing a court application to say to the judge, this couple is from, we used to do it for the Netherlands, but we don't have to do it anymore. This couple is from a country which does not recognize same-sex relationships. And for that reason, we are leaving the surrogate on the birth certificate for this reason only. However, the court order will say that the surrogate is not a legal parent of the child under Canadian law. So what we can do is basically anything. But normally, the surrogate will not appear on the birth certificate. It will only be the two parents. There's a citizenship question here for international parents. Unlike, we don't have the same problems that the United States is going through right now. Every child born in Canada is a Canadian citizen. That is by law, by statute. So your child will have a Canadian citizenship. Canada is a country where you can have multiple citizenships, and so there's no rules about you have to give up your Canadian citizenship unless the country that you're from requires it. So I always joke that there's lots of Americans walking around other countries right now with Canadian flags sewn on their backpacks. People tend to like Canadians, and your child will be a Canadian citizen. I'm often asked how long you will have to stay in Canada after the birth. Typically, and again, it varies, but I normally say a minimum of 2 weeks, up to a maximum of about 4 weeks. In some of the eastern provinces, Nova Scotia, it can be a little bit longer than that. But Canada is a lovely place to be, even Calgary in the winter. And you'll certainly get a warm welcome from those of us in the industry while you're here. You will go home with a birth certificate naming you as the parents and a Canadian passport for your child. I'm often also asked, do I need an agency? and of course I'm on a webinar with an agency, I think that there are you don't need an agency. There's no legal requirement that you have an agency for your surrogacy process in Canada. I believe that there's real value there. And the primary place that there is, in my view, conflict in that relationship is the difficult situation of examining reimbursable receipts and talking about money. Money's a hard thing to talk about. And so if you have a surrogacy agency in the middle managing the financial sides of it, you can really focus on the relationship with your surrogate. So the short answer is it legally necessary? No. But I'll probably talk with you. I'm not going to push you in any direction, but I will certainly talk with you, or Rachel will talk with you about why we think it does make sense to have a relationship in the middle. 95% of the time, the surrogacy journey is simple and easy, and we try so hard to make it easy for you. 5% of the time there's conflict, and in that 5% is where we as lawyers spend an enormous amount of our time. And we do find that if there's an agency involved, there's an extra level of advocacy on both sides, which is usually quite helpful. I did see a question about provinces. Again, I have the summary on my website, but with the sole exception of Quebec, you will be able to be on the birth certificate of your child in every province in Canada. The vast majority of provinces in Canada do not require you to have a genetic link to your child. There are 2 that do, but the rest do not. And what that means is that if you are using a donated embryo and your baby is born in British Columbia or in Ontario, you will still be the parents of that child. Okay. Those are the high level questions.
I have questions.
So why don't so yeah, those are the high level questions. What I really want to do is be interactive. So tell me what others are asking.
Okay, hang on. My other questions.
So while Leah's looking, Shawl, you had asked about the citizenship arrangement. You will have a Canadian passport. If you spend the extra $120, you can get it on 24 hours notice after you have your birth certificate.
Okay, my next question is, do you also, or not my next question, but the next question is, do you also work with, and this is both for Dr. Taylor and Ellen, does Olive have embryos that we could adopt or take on? And Ellen, do you do embryo donation contracts for people?
So my answer is yes, I am doing a lot of embryo donation contracts, and Dr. Taylor can talk about whether they have embryos at their clinic.
So stay tuned. Currently, we do not have an embryo bank. We're part of a network of clinics across the country, and we're working for about more than a year now, honestly, to try to get a national embryo bank, but it's really slow. So as of now, we do not have a bank of embryos. We do a fair amount. I can't recall the number, but I think we did about 30 embryo donations this past year, or so far this year, I think it was. So we do them. It's really straightforward, honestly. Yeah. Like, parties typically meet on social media. I speak to both them independently. They have counseling and legal sorted. And then we just change ownership and do the transfer. Embryo donation's quite straightforward. Sometimes it involves shipping embryos around, but yeah, we do embryo donation, but we don't have a bank. It's the short answer.
And I want everybody listening to understand that the word embryo adoption is not what we do in Canada.
Thank you.
An embryo is not a child. Legally in Canada, sperm is not a child, an egg is not a child, an embryo is not a child. This is a donation process. It is exactly identical to egg donation and sperm donation. So it really is that simple. In the US, this phrase related to adoption has been adopted, but that's not, it's important not to think about it that way, because perhaps when we think about it as using that phrase, we think it's more complex than it is. If I have 12 healthy. I mean, I have clients who have gone through the egg donation process with Dr. Taylor. They've got 16 or 18 healthy, beautiful embryos because they worked with one of Leah's donors, and they use up 3 or 4 to have their 2 children, and then suddenly we got 12 left. So I'm talking to all of those individuals about whether they would be open to donating embryos. And it's not just clinics, it's lawyers who you can talk to about that issue.
Absolutely. And we as well, we're in the process of well, actually, one of my kids is in the process of building out an embryo donor program that is both inclusive of LGBTQ community. You can be known, you don't need to be known, and you can be using a gestational carrier. And currently the only sort of nationwide program is one that has some requirements around faith-based adoption. Doesn't work with LGBTQ, and you're unable to access with a gestational carrier. So again, I'm glad to hear that you guys are working on that as well, Dr. Taylor. It really is just, it's just such an opportunity, I think, for people who have been blessed with a family to pay it forward to others. And so I really think it's just a great opportunity. My next question is legally, Ellen, what do you think is safer? Anonymous banked eggs, a fresh egg donor? Is there a difference legally in how someone can proceed? And then Dr. Taylor, the question for you is, what makes better chances, banked eggs, fresh donor?
So for me, there is my personal view is that the safest and simplest option is known donation. And the reason that I believe in known donation is that I believe that, we all have lots of, anybody in the fertility world has been to numerous conferences where psychologists talk about this. A child who learns that they were conceived by donor egg or donor sperm, who finds out about it in their mid-teens, is more likely to be traumatized by it than a child who is known from day one. And donors are not interested in attempting to have a relationship with your child, or maybe they are. Sometimes they want to know how that child has grown. They're giving you this amazing gift, but they are not doing this. You have to remember that they go through psychological screening, both with the agencies and with the clinics. So my view is that in order for children to have the most knowledge possible, known donation is the best chance. If there's any kind of a health issue with your child in the future, you've got the ability to reach out to the donor and say, hey, do you know anything about this issue in your family? I want to stress, however, that I am very well aware that there are certain cultures in which that is very scary. And if there is a cultural reason to have an anonymous donor, we'll work with everybody, of course. But my own view is that there is no special safety in anonymity. And frankly, if there is down the road a medical issue, you want to know who that donor is so that you can reach out to them. Beth, do you, or Dr. Taylor, do you?
Yeah, Beth. I like working with fresh eggs better than frozen. Though if you look at the literature right now, they're saying, fresh and frozen rates are pretty similar. It wasn't always the case. If you asked me 5 years ago, I would have said there was almost a 30% improvement with fresh eggs, but now it's they're getting close. So I like fresh eggs though, because we can get lots of them. Like if you're obtaining frozen eggs from a bank, say in the US, they're only going to sell you 6 or 7 eggs in a lot, which might give you about a 60%, maybe a little higher, but about 60 to 70% chance of a live birth. And there's no guarantee from that. Whereas if you can get a batch of 20 fresh eggs, you're much more likely to have a child and much more likely to have a sibling. So fresh eggs should be your first choice in my mind.
I agree wholeheartedly. I'm not a doctor, but I tell my clients all the time, I prefer to see fresh cycles.
Yeah. And for me, when it comes to anonymity, I absolutely respect and value everyone's cultural beliefs around family building. And so I know this doesn't fit for everyone. But I do want to invite you to think about all of the times that you have had a work colleague or someone reach out to you on LinkedIn because they recognized your photo, or in other ways. I know myself, having donated over 25 years ago, was recently contacted by a donor-conceived person, and that donation was before known donations were possible, but through 23andMe, it now is possible. And so, really looking at, is anonymity dead? And all of the research does tend to say that it is. And so, to really think about that and really consider that, but also to look at what works for you, what works for your family, what culturally you sits well for you. And with that being said, I will say that with banked eggs, often it gives an opportunity to find a donor that may be more difficult to find. There, and again, due to cultural beliefs, there often aren't a large number of South Asian or Chinese donors. Often, we're looking for those donors, and looking more closely at those donors. And so we have Egg Bank Canada, and we have, a number of diverse donors there as well, so that when you aren't able to find a donor either within your community or within, a database, that's an option for you as well.
On this question of embryo count, David had a question about a recommended minimum embryo count. They have a single euploid embryo only. And I may be treading onto agency territory here. My experience with surrogates is that they want you to be successful. And my suspicion, Leanne, you tell me if I'm wrong, is that surrogates they may not be very thrilled about the idea of working with a couple or a single person who only has one single euploid embryo. What's your thought on that?
For so many people, they've worked so hard to create an embryo, or for so many intended parents, they have worked through their embryos and have now at the last hour been told, yes, surrogacy may be the way, or they've been able to come to the decision that surrogacy is going to be the way. And so what I always say is, if you have one embryo, let's go, because intended parents will say, and if this doesn't work, we're out. And I'm like, let's shake on that, because I don't believe you. Once that surrogate is there, and once there is that hope again. And, my belief is not that success is necessarily in the success of this journey. It's in the success and reignition of hope and, a belief that this is possible. Nothing is guaranteed. And so whether you have one embryo or 5, find the surrogate that really gets your situation, feels deeply, and feels close to you in, being in this sort of not great situation of having one embryo. And, if you're in a province that has funding, get on a list. If there's a financial constraint around creating more embryos, let's talk about embryo donation. If it's, this was your last shot at sort of a genetic connection, let's get you onto some coaching calls. Let's get you in with a counselor to really uncover what the yearning underneath is around this genetic connection versus parenthood. And that will be the deciding factor, I would imagine, for you, is really, what's underneath, and are we able to get on the same page if you have a partner, or if you're on your own? Am I able to reconcile, all of those things? So, I always love a good underdog story, and one embryo is a bit of that. So, yeah, hope that helped for you. Okay, well, someone's asking if the intended parents are in the US, if you can still be compensated in Canada. As a surrogate, you can be compensated. It is not illegal for you to be compensated. What is illegal is for intended parents to be compensated. What is illegal is for intended parents to be compensated. What is illegal is for intended parents to be compensated. What is illegal is for intended parents to be compensated. What is illegal is for intended parents to be compensated. What is illegal is for intended parents to be compensated. What is illegal is for intended parents to be compensated. What is illegal is for intended parents to be compensated. What is illegal is for intended parents to be compensated. What is illegal is for intended parents to be compensated. What is illegal is for intended parents to be compensated. What is illegal is for intended parents to be compensated. What is illegal is for intended parents to be compensated. What is illegal is for intended parents to be compensated. What is illegal is for intended parents to be compensated. What is illegal is for intended parents to be compensated. What is illegal is for intended parents to be compensated. What is illegal is for intended parents to be compensated. What is illegal is for intended parents to be compen to come to Canada, whether they physically come here now or come here to pick up their baby, and pay someone to do it. And I sort of equate it to, if I go to the United States and rob a store, I robbed a store and did something illegal. And whether I agree with this law of non-compensated surrogacy or not, what I do know is that the law is really clear. And within our industry, we've seen a recent legal opinion that talks about that, and we can link that here or get that out to you. But as a surrogate, it is not illegal to accept compensation. And if you are a potential surrogate, I'd love to talk to you about how reimbursement really can make sense.
Yeah.
Because getting paid means paying taxes. Our country loves to tax everything, and child tax benefit, Trillium benefit if you're in Ontario, potential student loans for you or your family members in the next 3 years could significantly be impacted. And there are ways to work within the reimbursed system that I think really makes sense for surrogates to ensure that they're looked after and taken care of and deeply appreciated as they go through this process. But I would love to connect with you on that as well. And I think this is the last question. Is there a non-social media way to search for surrogate? Absolutely. Talk to your pastor at church. Tell your prayer group. Talk to your mom friends or dad friends. Talk to people about the fact that you're really, wanting to move forward with parenthood, but this thing is in the way, and you'd love any ideas anyone has. And again, if you're talking to your immediate family and you're talking to your parents and you're maybe from sort of a place of wanting to ask for their permission or their agreeance, my view always is ask for support. Support, not permission.
There is absolutely nothing shameful about infertility. It is a medical condition. Often it's people have waited a little bit too long, perhaps, for some heterosexual women. If you're a gay man, you need an egg donor and a surrogate. So there's nothing, we have to change the narrative and make sure that infertility is not seen as something shameful. It is something that people are willing to help you with.
And if you're not in Canada, social media is even better because your friends and family likely aren't going to see it if you are still figuring out how to come out about the whole surrogacy thing. So, there are absolutely communities online that you can look in. There are, I would say if you are going to do this in any kind of social way, go to Facebook. If you live in Greece, look for, Greeks living in Canada Facebook group. You'll have something in common. You may speak the same language, and there may be connection there. But really leaning into community. Your neighbor may have a cousin in Canada who would love to do this for you. It really can be that simple or complicated. And agencies can help you source people if that isn't up for you. But just know that it is. There are lots of options and ways to find surrogates. Ellen's link is in here. Dr. Taylor and Olive Fertility. Aaliyah, who is our fantastic background person, she will put that in there.
I saw somebody.
Oh, I love this fan. Yes, please book a consultation with Ellen. You can book a consultation with us. Welcome to Canada. Welcome, welcome. I love that you just got your PR. I love that you would prefer to have your child born in Canada. I would prefer your child to be born in Canada as well. I'm so proud to be a Canadian. And Aaliyah will put a link in. You'll get an email with information on how to book a consultation. But yeah, welcome to Canada. It is a great place, not only for pregnancy and birth, and the surrogates that participate are just, if I could leave you with this, it would be that intended parents ask all the time, how could someone come forward to do this? And having been a surrogate and carried 3 children, I will say, as a surrogate, it was the question for me was, how can these people trust me to do this most profound thing? And so journey equity is there. We see it every day as intended parents and surrogates show up in our community. And we are so grateful that so many of you took the time. I think we're over 50 people here. So you have community. Just know you are on this webinar with 50 other people who are not competition to find the surrogate or donor, but your community, your support, your people. So, you know, if you're looking for that, in the email back to Aaliyah, say, looking for community. We will find you someone in your city, in your country, in your province that will be able to, you know, share in this journey with you as an intended parent. Yes, if you want. Sorry, the questions sort of are keep coming. Yes. So what's really going to be important for you, I'm going to say your name wrong, Ekundeo, is for you to connect with Dr. Taylor, because we have many intended parents who imagine that they will be using their own sperm and an egg donor for in replacement of their eggs, of their wife's eggs. And, you know, through more testing of their sperm, you know, that is or isn't the case. But I think getting really clear on that before you engage, to ensure that you engage with a surrogate in the right province based on genetic connection or not. So first stop for everyone here, talking to a clinic about proceeding with your own sperm, your eggs, you know, your gametes being able to be used, if that's something important to you. You're welcome, Trudy. You're welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. And if you came on late, you'll receive the full recording, so you'll be able to see all of that there. Thank you, Dr. Taylor and Ellen.
Thank you. Thanks for
Thank you
including
very much.